Welcome to China Tech Talk, the almost weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, joined as always by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. So this week we're talking with Alvin Wang Graylin, the head of HTC Vive, about VR, AR, and the industry in China. To be honest, we end up focusing a lot on VR in general, the technology, the adoption rates, and kind of where it's all going. We do get into a little bit on the China market, and talk a little bit about the differences between the China market and the Western market, especially when it comes to VR. But I think, so on the one hand, maybe this isn't so China focused as you might expect, but still, I think it's a great discussion with someone who's really leading the industry in virtual reality. I mean, like HTC is the number one player. And so it was really great to be able to sit down with him and talk for about 45 minutes about virtual reality and what's going on in China in that space. So Alvin, first, thank you so much for taking the time. And one of the questions that we like to ask everyone when they first come onto the show is give us a little bit of background. So what's your story, and how did you come to join HTC?
Well, I've been in the tech space pretty much my entire career, and I've been associated with the VR. I first got interested in the VR space back in college. So 27 years ago, I was able to study under Tom Furness, who is seen as the godfather of VR. And he used to do research for the U.S. Air Force and did the first helmets and simulation systems for the Air Force, and took that and created the first VR research lab at the University of Washington. So, having time to get exposed to that, I got really excited. At the time, the technology was very immature and lots of cables and very low resolution and really heavy equipment, and it just a fraction of what we're doing today with a very, very small fraction of cost. And the devices were $300,000 or more to start, and now we're getting devices that are a few $100s that are 100 times better, right? So, but at the time, I saw the potential of what this could do, and I got really excited, and I, in fact, did my senior research paper on it about how VR is going to disrupt education and change our life long term, because I really feel like, particularly coming from an Asian background, education is kind of core to family and culture here, and everybody wants their kids to go to the best schools and get the best grades and so forth. So after understanding what VR can do, I really saw the potential to impact education and turn it into kind of the holy grail of learning, right? Because you can be exposed to any information, anytime, be any size, be put back into history, etc. So, very complex subjects can become very easily understood by almost anyone. And you're using your entire brain, not just your ears or your eyes, but also your tactiles, your ability to interact and manipulate, and to be immersed in the environment. Then you're using that full body learning that we're all born to have evolved into, this machine or this animal that learns best through doing. Right, and that's what VR can do for you. So that's what got me excited, and since then I've been kind of keeping tabs on it. Back in the 90s, it really didn't take off. Right, that was kind of the first wave. There was a couple movies that came out about it, and nothing really happened. And it's normal that nothing happened because it wasn't ready. Right, when devices are a few $100,000, there's no way for anybody to take it to a bigger scale. But what's happened over the last 20, 25 years is that the computer industry and the phone industry have taken all the components that were part of those devices and made them super cheap. Right, so if you look at what's in a standalone VR device, it's 80% of it is what's in a phone. Right, so it's actually very, so because of the scale of what the phone industry has created in terms of hundreds of millions of units of new product a year, they're able to bring all that cost down, amortize it. And so now, we're in a possibility where we can get this super immersive experience for a few $100s. And that's when it gets interesting, because now it means that anybody who can afford a phone or a PC or a laptop or anything can buy one of these devices. And these other machines are selling for hundreds of millions of units a year, if not more, right? So
Yeah, I mean it's funny because I remember actually in seventh grade. So this is back in 1997. I wrote we did a research project on virtual reality, and at the time it was like virtual reality is going to come. It's like it's only a couple years away. You know, it's going to be really awesome, and then of course it never really did. And so it's really cool to see kind of like you were saying. It's really kind of coming into its own. But like Matt and I were talking about this before. You know, really like the key question for virtual reality is adoption. And so kind of like so the way that you guys are thinking about this is in terms of really just turning it into like a mobile phone kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think adoption is, for at least from our perspective, it's about getting to scale, getting to something that's close to where PCs and phones are. I mean, phones are truly ubiquitous. I mean, we're talking 3, 4, 5 billion users out there, right? So I think it's going to take some time for VR to get there, not because of the cost, but more because of the user experience differences. But getting to where laptops and tablets are, I think that can happen much, much faster. In fact, I think one of the first devices that the VR AR device will replace will be tablet computers, because tablet computer is one of these kind of devices that are an optional supplement equipment that makes a few particular use cases better, right? It gives you a bigger screen so you can watch movies, maybe you can surf the web better, but that's really about it. You're not going to do real work on it. But if you can say, hey, now a VR device can give you not a 10-inch or 12-inch screen, but it can give you a 200-inch screen or IMAX screen, wouldn't that be a better experience for watching movies? If you're going to surf the web, the same. If you're going to go on a video conference, the same. Versus having that slightly bigger screen size, right? Now, I think at some point, we're going to get to a point where we have this thing on our head anyways. So now we start replacing all of our other screens with it. And pretty soon, you won't really need a laptop screen, or you won't need your TV screen, or you won't need your movie screen, because all of those screens can be replaced and be providing a better, higher fidelity in your VR screen. The only thing that's keeping that from happening right now is really more the size and kind of the social acceptability, right? When it becomes the size of glasses of what you are wearing every day anyways, then it becomes a natural thing. But now, people feel like he's wearing a box on his head, and this guy's like a geek. You can't take that outside, right? I mean, I've worn it a number of times when I'm on a plane, where if I'm watching, I'd rather watch on a 200-inch screen on the plane than watching this 8-inch screen that's in front of my seat, right? If I'm going to watch a movie. In fact, I watched a whole series of Ultra Carbon on this. It was kind of weird because Ultra Carbon is a lot of it is about kind of VR and AI and genetics, and so to watch that kind of a topic on a VR headset while you're 30,000 feet in the air, it's kind of surreal.
So it's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with. When you mentioned that just there, I thought of the Magic Leap, their new product, and it's exactly right. I think like people aren't just willing to wear something that heavy and that unfamiliar. They're not willing to make that jump, regardless of how good the experience is, I guess. So maybe we take a step back and look at a bit of the background on Vive, on HTC. For those listeners who aren't familiar on the podcast about the industry so much. So how is Vive doing in the China market and also globally? And what is your positioning relative to other players?
So Vive has, since the beginning, positioned itself as kind of the high-end premium VR provider, right? So we were the first to provide a full room scale VR with both hands, and to be able to walk around that space instead of being seated. And we were the first one to provide full 6DoF headsets and a standalone, so that you can be away from a computer or a phone and still be able to utilize this equipment. And we'll continue to release more and more products. We came out with the Vive Pro initially as the first enterprise focused VR device. So pretty much in every segment, we've been the first and always recognized as the best. Usually when you're the best and usually higher price, your volume is usually much lower than everybody else. That's at least in a normal economy. But in VR, it's actually kind of the opposite. What we're finding is that we're positioned as higher, we're priced higher, but we actually have higher volume and higher revenues than anybody else out there. We have about 30+% total revenue share globally for VR, including mobile and PC and console. And then we have about 50+% in China. So we're, kind of the dominant player in China. We're, the leading player in terms of revenue globally. So, I think why that is, at least from my perspective, I think VR is one of these devices where it doesn't pay to go cheap, right? Because, if you had, let's say, a phone and you could buy $100 phone or a $500 phone, if you can't really afford the $500 phone, you're probably like, okay, I'll just buy this $100 phone. Maybe the brand is not as fancy or impressive, but it's usable. It won't affect the way I use it. I can still make calls. I can still go surf the web. But if you buy a low-end VR device, you're gonna, you might feel cyber sickness or dizziness. You might, your eyes might get unclear because it's, the refresh rates are not good. So the experience just isn't the same, right? And I think that's what we prided ourselves on, is that we always want to make sure we provide the best experience. And I think at least the current user group have shown that they gravitate to better performance over price considerations.
So, I mean, it's interesting you say that because, in China especially, VR and AR was a really hot topic last year. And the entire space in China has pretty much almost completely cooled off. But a lot of these companies, it's exactly what they were doing, is they're targeting lower end, trying to bring VR to the masses. AR as well. I saw a few different AR equipment last year, and it was just the result was just not impressive at all. It's like, why in the world would anyone use this? But I'm kind of curious, and so like when you guys are looking at VR versus AR, where do you stand? I mean, you mentioned before that you're looking at like the ideal kind of equipment is glasses basically, but
the ideal is actually maybe contact lenses. Or maybe a chip in your head. The less equipment, the better, right? But I think a medium-term solution will be glasses-type solutions, and then there are definitely AR devices that are starting to get to that form factor. I think not necessarily ideal yet, and maybe some of the simpler ones that are just kind of a heads-up display, they can do it at that form factor. But to do a full-screen overlay, it still requires quite a bit of processing that won't fit on a smaller form factor yet, but that I think will change very soon. My perspective, since day one, is that VR and AR are actually part of the same continuum, right? It's called a virtuality continuum, and it's just a yeah. Well, I think mixed reality is, at least right now, it's more of a marketing term from Microsoft because they use it for everything, and but I think maybe the way to think about it is when it's completely virtual environment, virtual objects, then it's fully VR. If it's completely real environment with a few virtual objects on top, that's kind of AR, right? And I guess when you're kind of in between, you're kind of, people call it MR. But the idea is that this all should be done at some point with one device. It should not be you're going to put on your AR glasses when you go outside, you put on your VR glasses when you come in. It just doesn't work that way. It's people are just lazy and they won't accept that. In fact, technology allows you to be able to do both on the same device. In fact, there's two different paths to doing it. One is to go the see-through route and then having a very nice projection screen that then overlays on top of the see-through. The other way is to have a fully virtual world, but then you use very high-end cameras in the front. That's called pass-through. Right, so they both allows you to get to the same point of being able to see real and virtual in the same space. In fact, our current, both the Vive Pro and the Vive Focus, have front-facing cameras that allows you to create MR type experiences today on the devices that are already being sold in the market. So it's not something of tomorrow. Now the cameras are probably not high resolution enough. The refresh rates and latency are a little bit slow, but for some use cases, it's fine. We actually have developers now who are making pretty interesting content that integrates this camera and lets you be able to either render a fake environment on top of a real environment. Let's say here we see this board with a sign, but I could overlay this as a dungeon or as a forest, and you can still feel the dungeon wall, but it's different material, but you can see kind of looks like rock. Right, so it's the two will combine, right? And the idea is that if it's the screen becomes opaque, it's fully VR. If it's transparent, then it becomes fully AR, and maybe somewhere in between, it's your MR type scenario, right? But there's definitely no reason in 5-10 years we're wearing multiple devices to satisfy different needs.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I want to follow up on the point that you just brought up, John. There was interest in the market and then it cooled off. Could you explain, your take on this, why that was?
Yeah, so I think actually when it first came out, probably in 2016, when our device came out, when Oculus came out, when PlayStation came out, the market became super hot, right? And there was a lot of hype with any, new technology. It goes through this hype cycle. I'm sure you guys seen the Gartner hype cycle, and I think that's gone through. Also, AI and blockchain have gone through the same hype cycle over the last 2 years. Now, I kind of maybe disagree with John that you say it's really cooled off. It's actually now, I think 2018 is kind of come back up again. Yeah, because what we're finding is that the first time people had that over expectation, and then they went and saw some of the devices that you're talking about, Huajiangbei, which is like the low end stuff, and they're trying to get things down to a super low price, but you have to make compromises when you do that, and so you don't provide the experience that people want, and you don't have the content that goes with it, and so people get disenchanted, right? And I think that's what happened in the kind of the 2017, what people call the VR winter. But what we're finding now is actually volumes are picking up a lot this year versus last year. What we're finding is that this year with the Ready Player One movie, a lot more people are exposed to understand what's the potential of VR, not necessarily what they see today, right? Or particularly on the low end devices. And what we're also finding is that a lot of people are now getting a chance to try high quality VR because there's now more kind of high-end arcades out there instead of the ones that are the egg pods that essentially you watch a movie and it shakes a little bit and you're like, oh, that's it, right? But if you go and you try these new VR theme parks or the high-end VR arcades that let you walk around and you're playing with real guns with haptics and you're moving around a big space and you're multiplayer, then you really transform yourself to that new environment, that new world. That's what gets people excited. Once they see that high quality VR, then they really believe, right? That's what we find is that VR is one of these things that you can talk for hours and explain, and they're like, yeah, and it's like, and then as soon as they put it on, and then after 5-10 minutes, they come on, they're like, oh, this is great. I didn't know it was like this. I just thought it was, what I tried a few years ago with cardboard, right? So I think that's where things are, and now that we're seeing more and more businesses also catching on. That's what's exciting to me this year is that it used to be just the gamers who there might have been a few hundred or a few thousand. There's like 3,000 or 4,000 titles on our app store, which it's a decent amount, but I think we still don't have the the League of Legends or the Fortnite type of content on VR yet, although we do have like Fallout and LA Noire and a bunch of Beat Saber, which have gotten a lot of attention and have been made by sometimes really, really big players.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of the things that I wanted to bring up was one of the questions that we wanted to ask is use cases, but in particular, what's really interesting right now. So a good friend of mine owns a Vive, and he's had one for about a year now. He's a huge gamer. I'm into games, not as much. Like if you think I'm into games, like he's like so much more than I am. But he's got a Vive, and he's always like looking for new games to play. And some of the most fun games for him are these ones where they're all they're really doing is exploring a different mechanic. Like there's I forget what it's called, but it's like it's one where you have jetpacks on your arms or something like that, and then you have to swing from. It's like a virtual reality platformer with like a hoverboard, jetpack, and then a grappling hook, basically. But it's super interesting because that's all that it really is. And there's a lot of different games like that, like where they focus on archery or they focus on swordplay. And so he's like, because he's really big into AAA games as well, and for him it's like, this is a really, really cool mechanic. I love playing it. Imagine like playing Zelda on this, or imagine playing Dark Souls on this. And so I guess the question is like, when do you think we're going to get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much and we talk to all of the AAA developers, right? And pretty much all of the developers are working on VR content. In fact, a lot of them are designing their next generation content to be kind of VR ready from the beginning. The good news is that all the engines that these guys have been building stuff on, whether Unreal or Unity, are the same engines that are being used in VR environments. So once you built it, you could kind of repurpose it into VR very, very easily. Now, what the issue is in terms of why a lot of the bigger AAA players haven't released yet, or maybe they haven't focused on it, is because the scale's not there. Right. I mean, they're used to putting out a piece of product, and Red Dawn did whatever Redemption just made like $700 million in like a week or something. So, you're not going to make that kind of money on VR games right now, just because there's not that user base, right? And the user base that's out there are used to paying $5, $10 for a title. They're not used to paying $60 unless you're maybe on PlayStation. There might be a couple of games there that range, but so they're not able to generate the ROI on that investment, right? Now, that's not saying they're not doing it. All of them are preparing for it. In fact, pretty much every AAA developer I know has projects on it. They just haven't released it. Like, I can't release it now. What's the point? And I know if I release it, I make all my money in the first few weeks, and now there's not enough users. So I understand their kind of dilemma, right? And any gamer who have played kind of the same title in both, they can appreciate the value of that immersiveness and when you're in that gaming environment. Now, but I still want to emphasize that I think the value of VR goes well beyond gaming, right? Because gaming is one of the early adopters, because those are the people, and those are content providers that are the first to adopt, because they're using the same tools, and those are the people that already had the PCs that were VR ready, so they were the first to use it. But the value of this gets to when any PC, when any phone, when any console can play the high-end VR experiences, or when the standalones can all do it by themselves, so that you can put that as part of your daily life, right? It becomes your way to socialize with your friends. It becomes your way to go to the office. Instead of getting in the car, driving for an hour in traffic, and then being tired by the time you get to work, you put on your headset and you're at work, right? And you're in this virtual environment. In fact, we're doing this today in some of our office meetings, is that we actually have our own inter-office meetings in VR. We just released a week ago something called the Sync app, which is built by our Vive Studios to help people have in VR meetings, and it allows for 20 to 30 people at one time in a space, and you designate your own space, and it can be managed by the company, so it can be very secure, so that you can actually have that multi-person in space experience. Pretty soon we'll add things like eye tracking into it, so you can really have that eye-to-eye conversation. We allow you to walk around. We allow you to personalize your avatar. We'll at some point be able to add in facial recognition, so that you can see those micro gestures that are part of the normal face-to-face interactions that are hard to get today. Even in a video conference, and you're seeing another table in another room, and then you don't really see their face, and you don't really get to interact. But if you can go up and walk up to them in that virtual table and see them eye to eye and say, why didn't you make your quota this quarter? They're going to feel a lot more pressure than if you just said something on the phone. Right? But kidding aside, actually, it's really about the ability to communicate, in a lot of ways, both verbally, through your face, through your hands, through your movement. A lot of that, non-verbal is what really communicates, and that's what VR brings for you, right? And that's why it excites me. But in addition to just conferencing, you can use it for design. The architecture, engineering, construction space is taking up this very, very well. We're finding anywhere from 2x to 10x improvements in productivity. Right? You have buildings that are being put up in half the time. You have cars that are being designed in half the time. 2 weeks ago, Bell Helicopters released a case study where they built their new concept helicopter in 6 months. In the aerospace, I don't know how much you know about aerospace, but usually it's like 5 years, 10 years to build a new vehicle. They went from concept to having a workable prototype 6 months, which is crazy. And the reason they said was they did everything in VR. All the testing, all the pilot feedback, all the usability, all the streamlining, the aerodynamics, everything was done in VR. So there was no need to do any physical kind of prototypes, early prototypes, and that saved a lot of time. And then also, since most of their people are in different offices, they don't have to fly around to go to a place and wait for things to happen. They could just put on a headset from anywhere and be able to have that same unified experience. Right. So that's just one very, very, I think that's an extreme example. I don't think 10x is normal, but I think 2 to 3x is definitely normal. But if you think about it, if you're Boeing and you could release, instead of 10 years later your 797, now you can release it in 5 years. That's 5 more years of revenue that you can get. That's 5 less years of engineering compensation that you had to put into it, right? And just so much wasted hours that people are putting into it that you couldn't do before. I know people are doing this for big malls or big buildings to be able to simulate how would people move when they're in here, how would if a fire happened, how would they go, and all these things that both for safety reasons as well as for cost reduction, as well as for just the people flow. How would it be interesting if I move this up or down the ceiling by 2 meters, or if I'm just doing for my home renovation, what would it look like if I put this wallpaper on instead of that wallpaper, right? That's just, all of that is already happening today, right?
So I want to step back a bit. In the revenue numbers that you gave us earlier on, what is the breakdown there of like to B and to C? Because it seems like there's gaming with mass consumer adoption is quite different from the business case scenarios you just mentioned. And for the to B section, if you could just like give us a little bit of color on like what are the specific industries that are getting the strongest adoption, and what are the use cases?
So I think for different regions is actually a little bit different. In China, I would say about half and half of our revenues is going to B versus to C. In Western markets, it used to be primarily to C, so I would say 80 to 90%. It's probably now come down to maybe 60 to 70% because the enterprise and business market is starting to gravitate to this as well. Now that they see the real benefits of it, you have. Like Dave and Buster, they just opened 150 locations with VR arcades, or you have like Walmart just bought like 17,000 units of VR devices to train their employees, and Volkswagen is buying 10,000 units to go train their production line. UPS has 100,000 trucks on the road anytime, and they're training drivers to be safer when they drive. Or you have FedEx is using it to teach their people how to pack their packages in the plane so that they can maximize so all these things, it's definitely happening. All right. Now in terms of which industries are adopting it the most, what we're finding is education is one of the early adopters. I'm glad to see that, because that was what I had predicted 20 something years ago. It's finally happening, and what we're also finding is that based on some of our research, when you study in VR, you remember more, you understand it better, you test better, and you're more excited, you're more interested in it, right? For any topic, right? So I think that's really the key, is that it now opens up and democratizes high quality education for anybody that can access a headset, versus before. I think one of the most scarce commodities in the world is high quality teachers. But if you can make VR and combine it with AI and supplement it with good teaching, you can make essentially any teacher a super teacher, right? And everybody can get high quality education, which means that they're going to have a better future. Right. Now, in terms of other industries, we talked about engineering, architecture. We talked about offline entertainment, location-based entertainment. Healthcare is actually now an industry that's really picking up. What we're finding is that most of the illnesses that you have actually cannot be fixed with just medicine. A lot of it requires your mind to support. Right. In fact, a lot of it can be fixed with just the mind. We talked about the placebo effect before, right? And what is that? It just means that if your mind believes that it's going to happen, it fixes itself. So you could eat a real medicine, or you could have a sugar pill, and you have 90% of the time it's actually the same impact, right? As long as the doctor tells you and you believe it. So, but what VR does is that VR allows you to let your body believe a lot of things that medicine cannot fix alone. I'll give you an example. Where one of the companies we invested in, they do chronic pain relief using VR. So they did a project with the Stanford Hospital where for pain patients, which let's say one of their limbs is hurt or has so much pain that they cannot move, the other one works fine. What they'll do is that they put on the headset, and even though their left arm is the disabled one, they use their right arm to make a statue or to paint a painting, but they see their left arm moving, right? So their brain sees their left arm moving and says, hey, my left arm is moving and it's not hurting. I guess maybe my pain signals are wrong, so I'm going to rewire it. And after a couple sessions, that chronic pain that's been there for years goes away. Now, it might come back in a few months, but in a few months you just go back and you do the session again and it works, right? So, the fact that your brain is so plastic and it can heal itself, and we know that if somebody's a cancer patient and they get visits by their family or their pets or their children, they live longer, right? They recover more, right? So if you can put on this headset and you can, see your family that's thousands of miles away, or you could travel back to your childhood home and make you happier. If you're happier, you're going to be healthier. Right. So there's just a lot of things that, stress relief. We just finished a study where we had 200 white collar workers in various 5 different companies replace their afternoon break with a VR break. And 97% of people, before we started the study, said they feel stress at work. Right. And I think 60% they feel high stress at work. Right. And after the study, we asked them, how was it? Was it effective? Over 90% of people said it was effective. And over 60% said this was more effective than the best methods I have right now for stress relief, including travel, including exercise, including music.
So what was the experience, the VR experience?
So we let them choose from a few different things. You can travel to a different place, you can explore, there's some games, there's some active and non-active depending on what your choice is, right? But we gave them a few kind of fixed apps that they could choose from. And this was using our standalone device. So this wasn't even the full 2 hands. This was, one hand with moving around and with ears and eyes, but not the full body tracking that you could actually get with, the devices, the most high-end devices. And people are already having that kind of impact. And the reason we use that standalone device is because it's just easy, right? You put it on and within 2 seconds you're in. You don't have to worry about setup and calibration and teaching people things, right? But that was a very interesting finding for us, because probably the biggest issue that we're having in our daily lives, for most people, is that they're overstressed. Right. So how can we make them happier? How can what is why do people do everything they do? At the end of the day, if you ask enough whys, it gets back to I want to be happy. Right? Why do you work? Also, you can buy things. Why do you want to buy things so you could have a good life? Why do you want to have a good life so you can be happy? Why do you want to have children so you could see them grow up? And why do you want to see them grow so they can go to good school? Why do you want to see them go to school so they can but at the end of the day, it's like, why? Because I want to be happy. Right? So VR can actually help you put yourself into any state environment that makes you relax, makes you happy, makes you more productive. And we all know when we're happy, we're going to be more creative, right? Particularly going forward, as AI become more and more important in our lives, the ability to crunch numbers, the ability to remember things is not going to be very important, but the ability to be creative and have that imagination that makes us uniquely human, that's what's going to be important. Right. So I think that's another aspect of it, is that AI and VR are going to come together, and they will actually help make each other stronger.
I want to go back to a point you've touched upon it already, but I just want to explore it more. Is the difference in VR adoption and that we see in the China market compared to the rest of the world? If you could just extrapolate upon what you've already given us, because I think we're focusing on the China market. The stuff we've been covering mostly is covering the world. But what is the difference there? What do you see?
Well, I think right now it's starting to become more and more the same. 2 years ago, it was very, very different, right? Because the U.S. market or the Western market was extremely game focused. So I would say probably 80 to 90% of users were game users that were probably Steam users, right? And also maybe that's because of our association with Steam and their impact on their user base, right, allowed us to reach that particular audience very quickly. Now, what we're finding is that as more and more people start to get familiar, we're finding it's now getting into other areas, into education, into sports, into design and so forth. Now, in China, I think it became so hot so quickly, everybody knew about it. So it wasn't just the gamers that knew about it, and so a lot of people started experimenting. And we also had the VR arcades, within 6 months, we went from 0 arcades to like 10,000 arcades, which is crazy. Right? I mean, that's one thing about China is that when something sort of works, everybody wants to do it. Right? Now, over the last year and a half, we've gone from 10,000 back to about 4,000, which is probably a healthier number because now the 4,000 are actually surviving and having a sustainable business. Before, there was probably 10 or 20% that were doing well, and the rest of them were just, had no idea what they were doing. They just bought a headset, opened a room in their bedroom and called it an arcade, right? Which we don't really want that because that doesn't provide the right experience. Now we're having real theme park people, real offline entertainment people, KTV people, so people like that who know how to operate experiential businesses get into it, and they're doing it right. They're putting it better content. They're just having better service, etc. Right? So because of the arcade business, it really opened up a lot more people to be exposed. And so, China is one of these places that's so competitive that any advantage you can get, you're going to do. And that's why, you see a lot of real estate companies here really got onto VR because I can sell my apartment that won't be done for 2 years, but I can show you how cool it's going to look, or I could sell you this vacation house overseas and I know I can't fly you over there, but put this on and you can see, the view from your deck, right? Or I can sell you this vacation, to the Maldives, and if you put this on, you can see what it's like from the beach you're going to be on, right? So a lot of people used it for that, and that wasn't really popular in the States because it just was a little too complicated for a lot of people. But the Chinese business people really kind of climbed onto that, right? Now we're starting to see the broader usage. Now you see the government starting to support it here, right? That's another big difference here versus anywhere else. 3 weeks ago I was in Nanchang and at the World VR conference, industry conference, and Xi Jinping wrote like a full-page letter saying how important VR is, and you guys need to work together. We need to work with all of our global partners around the world to make VR better. I mean, I just don't see Trump saying words like that, right? And then the Nanchang government put on this show where they essentially put every street advertising in the city had the word VR on it, right? Every lamppost on the highway had a VR on it. Every building that could project something had VR projected, right? So the few thousand international guests that came to this conference were like, wow, you guys are really into VR, So that what that shows is that commitment from the government, right? And they've already said they put in hundreds of millions of dollars in investing into companies to support VR, and China is going to do much bigger than that as a nation to support it, right? And they've recently put it as a part of their the university official degrees. One is now VR. There's no other country that has an official degree in VR. Right? In fact, the first university to offer it was the Beijing Aeronautics and Aerospace University, which I'm a kind of associate professor at, and it's the first master's degree program in VR in the world, and they've already graduated the first class. Right? So that's what's exciting about China is that it's a place where technology adoption happens faster, and people are not afraid to try new things. Right? So, and when the government's behind it, when the business are behind it, when it makes business sense, you're going to see adoption here happen faster. And in fact, if you look at we talked about Ready Player One earlier, 400 million people in China watched Ready Player One. That's a huge number. That's more than everybody in the United States put together, right? So 40 to 50% of total revenue for the movie was in this country, right? Even though it was a Hollywood movie. This is actually the first time a Hollywood blockbuster made more money in China than the rest of the world. Yeah. So that's what's exciting is, technology adoption and interest in this market is huge.
So I think we're coming up close on time. But as a way to wrap it up, I mean, we have a few philosophical questions that we want to pose to you. One is from Elon Musk. Matt, I'll let you ask that in a second. But Yuval Noah Harari, a pretty famous author at this point, Israeli historian, has written 3 books now. One of his predictions in his second book was something that he called the useless class, and how like VR is basically going to be like what they do all the time, similar to what we saw in Ready Player One, the book and the movie. So artificial intelligence is going to take up more jobs. There's going to be more people without really much to do. They probably have universal basic incomes. They won't really have to work. They're just going to be using like pretty much living their entire life in virtual reality. What do you make of that kind of idea?
So I mean, I can understand that perspective, and And I think, if you go back in history, when the first, steam engines came out, they made the same predictions. When the first computers came out, they were the same predictions. When the first robots came out, they were the same predictions. All these people are going to go out of work. There's nothing for these people to do. When the first, the farming equipment came out, the same thing, right? Because at every point in history, we spend our time doing different things that were limited by our technology. But as we start to utilize what's the core value of what we are, which is our imagination, our creativity, I think that's what VR and AI opens up for us. It takes the monotonous stuff. The robots, the steam engine took away the need for us to use our manual labor, right? The computer kind of took away the need for us to write on paper and to send things and you make it faster. And the AI now and robots, it's taking over all the things that we used to do. Right now, what can we do now? There's going to be things that we can create and we can imagine that isn't what's possible with computers today, at least not current level or maybe next few years level of AI. Maybe in 10 or 20 years when we get to super AI, it might be different. But at least until that happens, there's nothing that can replace human imagination and human intellect, right? So if we can start saying, hey, now if people have everything provided to them because we have robots that make everything for a fraction of the cost, and we can now spend our time not necessarily doing useless things, but actually spending our time doing the things that we are best at doing. Right? If you look at, are we the strongest animals in the world? No. Are we the fastest? No. Do we have the most dexterous hands? No. Right? So why are we competing with machines who can do this better? Right, and so we need to see what we can do that's different and spend our time doing it. For instance, making worlds, making experiments, solving the world's problems, solving the unified theory, right? Those are kind of things that we can do that a machine by itself cannot. So, and those things were created when a lot of these early breakthroughs were created because people had time to think about it, right? For the first 100,000 years of our life until about maybe 5,000-6,000 years ago, we spent all of our time gathering food and hunting. You didn't have time to solve the world's problems and think about how to make computers or how to write poetry or how to do art. You just survived, right? And now, where every time there was a new technology revolution, we had more time, and we spent more time doing new creative things that created more technology that freed us from doing the most monotonous things, right? And that's what's going to happen with this new generation technology. And I'm not just saying VR by itself. I'm saying VR, robotics, genetics, AI, VR, AR, all together. That combination of the exponential technologies that we're all facing and touching today, we're at a super special time in the history of mankind, that we're able to have so much help that we can turn everybody into a super intelligent being, right? We can have the entire history of knowledge of mankind at your fingertips and be able to crunch it in a way that makes sense out of it. And then you decide, what questions you want to ask instead of just, I'm going to crunch this number. Okay, well, this month we made, X thousands of dollars and, that's my job, right? That's a very boring job. But if you can say, okay, well, based on the history of data that we have, how can we, instead of solving, how can we cure cancer, right? How can we create an infinite energy source? How can we go and live in space for 1,000 years and still, on a very limited energy of a particular starship? Right. Those are kind of things that we're going to start thinking about. So we're going to have a lot of things that we need to, we haven't been able to ask because we haven't either had the resources or the time or the capability or the processing power. Right. And that's all going to happen.
I just want to get in. I've got two questions that I want to get in before we finish with that. One is, so maybe short answers, I guess, but one is that in the conference you referenced earlier, I think there was an interesting announcement from the one that the media picked up on. I think was Pony Ma saying that eventually we're going to do VR WeChat. But what sparked that was the fact that he was more concerned about the implications of 5G. So what is 5G going to be a game changer for VR? It seems to be around the corner. So I just want to get your take on that.
So actually, the conference I was talking about was a World VR conference, which was in Nanchang. The one you're talking about is the Wuzhen conference, which was the World Internet Conference. They sound very similar. Yeah, the World Internet Conference, which was 2 weeks ago. Yeah. But yeah, so Pony Ma on the first day of the World Internet Conference did say that they're seriously considering doing VR WeChat, and I think that's absolutely wonderful news. Right? The reason is because the application today that we spend the most time in, at least in China, is WeChat. I look at the screen time and whatever on your phone, and it tells you which apps you're using, and I use that by far more than any other app, right? And so if you can have an immersive experience with this app and with a user base of over 1 billion people, this is as good, if not better, than having League of Legends VR version. I would rather have this because I think this adds more value than a game. Right? I think games are great for kind of spending time, your leisure time, but WeChat is being used for work, for education, for social, for home. So it's something that is a cross use case application, and if we can make that VRified, I think that would be one of the killer apps that would drive adoption.
Kind of like similar with Facebook.
Yeah, I think Facebook's slightly taking a different bent. They've tried their Spaces thing, and they're more taking, I think, a hardware approach right now. I don't think they've really created a kind of messenger version of VR. Right. What they created is kind of a kind of a Second Life use case version that's cartoonish for early adopters. Right. And because of that, they didn't and they've limited to only their own devices. So there's just very few users. Right. And that's with any social network, it's about the number of nodes, right? And so there is no network effect or very little network effect when the users are very little. And so what we need to do is, if we can get 1 billion users on something versus getting 1,000 or 100,000 users on something, the value goes up exponentially. And the reason to be connected goes up exponentially, right? So there's no reason for the first person to have a cell phone, right? It's only when everybody has one, that's why it all started blowing up, right? So that's I think so. I'm super excited about that happening.
About 5G.
So I think 5G is important for two reasons. Actually, VR is as important for 5G as 5G is important for VR. Right? And I talked to a lot of the Chinese carriers, and what they're saying is, hey, I'm going to spend $1 trillion building up these networks, 5G networks, and I don't really see a killer app for this network. Now, the only thing we see right now that would need this kind of bandwidth, that would need this kind of low latency is VR and live streaming 360 video and maybe car networks, right? But that's about it, right? And where not everybody's going to have an autonomous car, so it probably that might be a lower impact thing, but I think very soon almost everybody will have some kind of a VR device, right? And when that happens, that's going to drive the need for that network to be able to move all the processing from your headset itself, that's currently a box, into something that looks more like glasses, because most of the processing can actually happen in the cloud. Right, and that's the value what this will provide. So it helps each other because it makes the device a lot more manageable, a lot more social friendly, and maybe costs will go down as well.
Basically, summarize value of 5G, lifting that computing power with bias into the cloud.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that a big bottleneck, you think?
It is, in the sense of right now, not everybody has a VR ready PC, right? And now that there's the standalone devices are coming out, people are still not that happy with the size and shape. Right? So when we can use this technology to offload the heat, the battery, the processing to something else, then it becomes something that can be worn all day, be comfortable, not too heavy, and doesn't look like a dork. Right. So these things kind of go together. Yeah. But I do have to warn people that, even though 5G is releasing in the market next year, for it to really get to a point where it's everywhere, it's going to be years. Right. I mean, that same for 3G, same for 4G, so it'll start with a couple cities, and then it'll go to 10 cities, and then it'll go to 50 cities. But, there's several hundred significant cities in China. Right. So.
Handsets aren't even ready for 5G
There will be handsets for 5G, but honestly, 5G handsets does not add value. Right. I mean, to take your voice, it takes like 5 kilobits or 8 kilobits of voice text transfer is enough to send that voice over. Right. Why do I need 5G at a gigabit or 10 gigabits of processing or of transfer speed? Right. So, and 5G phones are the antennas will use 2x the power. So you need to have twice the size of the battery, be hotter to do the same thing. What's the point, right? So that's why I'm not that excited about 5G handsets, right? Because if you're just saying, oh, I'm going to watch, YouTube videos or Youku videos, I don't need 5G, right? So it's going to make your cost for these handsets. The cost will go up, the weight will go up, and the stability will actually go down because there just aren't as many devices. If you travel, so it'll still kind of drop down to a 4G or 3G to make it work. So to do global roaming, you still need to run it on 3G, 4G most of the time. And when you're at home in your several cities that have it, so 5G phone in terms of being a real useful use case is still some time away.
Sure. So last question, very philosophical one, I guess, is the quote from I'm thinking of this is the quote from Elon Musk, where he said, like, basically the chances are we already are in virtual reality. And just wanted to get your take.
Well, I mean, Elon Musk's his argument is that, because we're in an environment where technology is constantly advancing, and if we've been advancing for billions of years, then at some point in this history, either we are already in, or at some point we will be in a simulated world that can be as real as the real world, right? Which I think philosophically I agree with that, right? And in fact, if you look at the advancement, it's not a gradual advancement. We've been advancing for about 10,000 years since we started agriculture in significant ways, but more advancement has happened in the last 100 years than in the last 1,000. More advancement has happened in the last 20 years than in the last 100, and more advancement. So it keeps going, right? The more advancements will happen next 5 years than the last 20. So at some point we will get to that point where a simulation will be this real as with this, and maybe we already are. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? Because if we are in a simulation, then at least we're given a purpose, right? The simulation if you go back to this, then you can say, hey, well, look at the Matrix, right? Why did the machines make the Matrix? So that these humans who are the batteries in this movie have a purpose, right? But I think that comes down to our core reason for being alive, right? And we need to find kind of our purpose, and if our purpose is to be in this particular simulation to have an activity that drives us, and maybe your purpose is to bring out the best news to people, and maybe my purpose is to try to help bring the best technology to these simulated people. But whatever it is, we're happy, we're contributing, and we're serving a need in this world. Whether it's a real world or a virtual world, it doesn't really matter. I'm hoping it's a real world. I'm hoping I'm not doing this all just for a game. But at the end of the day, if we're part of it and we don't know, and it gives us satisfaction, then does it really matter?
Well, Alvin, thanks so much. One of the things we'd like to ask all of our guests is if people want to find you online, where can they do that?
So my Twitter account is Graylin, Graylin, and you can also follow me on LinkedIn. So Alvin Graylin. Thanks.
All right. Well, Alvin, thank you so much. And that's about all the time we have for this edition of China Tech Talk. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes, or if you're on Pocket Cast or Overcast, you can tap on that star button and it will recommend this episode to your network.